What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 103, and I am the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone, talking about the cops and the wars today. So share the show. You could find the video version at YouTube and at Odysee, and then we post everything on our social media accounts at Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. The Twitter account is at con_interest. You could support the show financially. We take fiat donations at Patreon and at Subscribestar. You could donate Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. We put the addresses, the wallet addresses in our show notes page. You could also support the show by supporting our sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is where you go to get your high-quality CBD products. And as of today, you'll be able to check out their brand new high-quality website. It's definitely a website that was built for 2021. Once you go there, you'll absolutely love it and know that you're buying your CBD products from a very reputable outlet. They put a lot of time and effort into it, like they do everything. So check out the new website, PalomaVerdeStore.com. Now, along with launching the new website, they're putting out a Facebook Live launch event tonight, so everybody could go check out some great music, play some trivia. I will put the link to that on the Facebook page and on the show notes page. Again, that's a Facebook Live event. I believe it's 7:30, April 30th. In that central time zone, that is. So PalomaVerdeStore.com, check out the new website and get yourself some great CBD products. And then when you do that, use the promo code PEACE, PEACE. That gets you a discount and gets the store kickback. Again, promo code PEACE. Help yourself, help the show. All right, now let's get into the content. So the first story I have today is to talk about the killing of Andrew Brown Jr. I want to do this in part because protests are starting to break out over this killing. There's a lot of talk about it, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of details yet. Now, on the last show, I had alluded to this and planned to talk about it on today's show, assuming that we would have the body cam footage of the officers, because the family had been shown at least a small clip of that body cam footage. I thought that was a pretty good signal that if they're showing people, they're going to release it to the public. However, a motion from several media outlets was denied by Judge Jeff Fisher, who said that the video will not be released to the public, at least for the next 30 days. So that's where we're at, kind of with the knowledge that the public really knows. Now, there have been comments made, of course, that they're made by the parties of interest here, the family of Mr. Brown Jr. and then the police department. And so I'm going to kind of break down what's been said so far. But right now at this point, I'm kind of keeping in mind that everything we know it is coming from one or two sources. I guess one of the actual concrete details that we do have is this interaction started off with the police attempting to serve an arrest warrant, and the arrest warrant was over 3 grams of cocaine. And in a sense, the story should end there. Like, the police should never be, going out and trying to arrest somebody over a warrant for 3 grams of cocaine. Now, of course, maybe there's 4 other warrants that they're not telling us about yet, and this guy, had committed 6 homicides or something crazy. But assuming that it, and it's being reported as this one warrant was what they're serving it for, everybody involved is making a huge mistake, and we should really look at the prosecutor for kicking this whole thing off. But then, of the conflict, I believe we're pretty sure that he was killed in the car, and the family claims that he was shot, I believe, 5 times, with 4 of those hitting him in the arm, and then the kill shot being in the back of the head. They had an independent autopsy carried out, and so, again, we could assume that the medical examiner is operating in good faith, maybe, but at the same time, this is just one of the 2 sides, and so we will eventually have the state medical examiner's report, and it could show something else or other relevant factors possibly. The son, I believe, the son of Andrew Brown, is the one who saw the video, and he is describing it as an execution, and certainly the idea that he was shot in the back of the head kind of does line up with the execution idea. It's hard to imagine why an officer would have to shoot someone in the back, but more information could still come out. Now, this happened in North Carolina, so we've gotten some reports from North Carolina Sheriff's Office that at least 7 officers were somehow involved in this and were initially put on administrative leave. 4 of those officers are now back on the job, and the police department put out the statement saying they had nothing to do with the shooting. I don't know if this is true or not. Again, this is just the statement of the police department. And then there's 3 officers still suspended: Daniel Meads, Robert Morgan, and Aaron Llewellyn, I believe it is maybe how you say his last name. And they are still on leave, and it was indicated that these were 3 that fired their weapon. Unclear, maybe one officer shot him every single time. One officer shot him in the arm, one shot him in the head. One pulled his weapon, didn't shoot. Unclear. Um, Kind of, I'm guessing this may be a situation where he was in his car, and when somebody's in their car and the officers approach, they put their bodies around the car, and then if the car goes in either drive or reverse, it instantly becomes what the police call a deadly weapon, and it gives them an excuse to shoot somebody. And so this could really be a situation where police, generate a situation where one of them ends up getting, being put in danger, and then and from their point of view, they'll say, "Oh, we had to shoot the guy." So I'm kind of guessing that's how the story's going to come out, but we don't know all the details yet because, again, the judge has blocked the release of this video. Now, I kind of see there is a second side to the coin on blocking the release of this video. If the judge watched that video and is like, this is going to be evidence in a possibly first or second degree murder trial because that the cop went up and shot the guy in the back of the head, then maybe it's easier to get a fair trial if this video doesn't get released to the public and everybody forms an opinion about it. The problem is that it's very easy to sweep the whole situation under the rug, playing by the exact same playbook there, where you don't release it to the public. You say, oh, the prosecutor's gonna look at. The prosecutor says, oh, nothing happened. So I see both sides to this, and why maybe, again, if it's very clear that this is going to be evidence of a murder, you wouldn't release this video footage. At the same time, I think the best situation is for the public to find out. Um, so that's where we're at on this. There's protesting now going on. The protesters, I guess, are, in addition to demanding charges, also demanding the release of this footage. I also hope we get the release of the full body cam footage. And one thing we have to consider, like, if there was some circumstance that makes it okay to shoot this guy in the back of the head, I can't imagine what that would be, but I can't imagine that there is a scenario out there where that would be the case. Then it would be really terrible for the cops to have shown the family a clip of his killing that didn't show the full context, and they're out there saying that this is an execution, hiring lawyers and protesting and misrepresenting what happened, because it's been misrepresented to them. And so if at this point you blame the cops for everything. I want to point out, too, that during the protest, Ford Fisher, of course, has been out there covering it. Guy does absolutely heroic amount of work from the independent media lens of just being on the ground at the places where we need somebody to come in and just show us what's happening. We don't need CNN with their, mostly peaceful protest banner on there. We need Ford Fisher out there going around, people are, saying what's happening and stuff like that. But generally just, showing people what's happening in these very intense situations. So one of the things that he pointed out is that the cops, they look like soldiers. I mean, this is crazy. They have like night vision goggles and quite a bit of equipment. And so it's very unfortunate that we now have such militarized police, but they're showing up to all these protests. Now, a couple other stories I want to get into, and this first one isn't my usual topic. I don't talk a whole lot of economics. Is not what I know the most about, but there was this story that sounded real fishy to me, and I wanted to bring it up. And if anybody has any more insight, I'd be happy to read a couple articles or possibly interview it on you. But I think it's a big deal. And it says the title of this is How Private Equity Firms Buy Assets from Themselves. And I think it was reposted on the Financial Post, but this initially came from Reuters. And this article goes down and says that there's these private wealth funds that have, private equity firms that have different funds, and they're now establishing new funds to buy different assets from the funds that they already control. And so, essentially they're selling these assets to themselves. And it sounds like, something that was going on around like 2007, 2008, like during the housing bubble. And so that's why I thought this was important and wanted to bring it to people's attention. And again, not knowing how all this works, and that, maybe there is a more benign explanation for what's happening here, but it seems very sketchy, especially because it's a situation like where the private equity firm wants to hold on to an asset, but they have investors who want to pull assets out, and so they're setting this up to bring more investors in. um and it seems in a way like maybe Ponzi scheme-esque, but again, I don't understand all these economics here. The other problem, of course, is trying to put a value on a company that you're selling to your house, to yourself. Like if you buy your house from your parents or something like that, it's not the same kind of negotiations that you're ever going to have with somebody else. And so, when you have that kind of conflict of interest, then it creates ethical dilemmas and issues. And in this article, it talks about how these companies would hire like a private firm to come in and do the evaluation to how much the fair market value for the company is. But of course, then the question is uh, even if the firm is quote unquote independent, just like you had independent medical examiner in the other case, those firms do know, in that medical examiner do know who's paying the bills, and that maybe if you find certain things and not find other things, then that company is going to, or that particular lawyer is going to hire you again. And so that that's where the ethical and potentially again conflicts of interest come in. And so I have an issue with that. Also, in the article, one of the things they outlined was that in one case they took I guess an offer made by one company for an asset that a fund had, and then use that value to sell that asset to another fund. But then also that company got that company that made that offer still made a deal with that fund. And so again, it seems like there may be a conflict of interest there, or potential secondhand backroom deals going on that could allow these are massive deals happening. These are the potentially huge tax breaks, people getting rich off the rest of us. Now, let's go to this next story I have from Mother Jones, and it's a new study that was done in California on child protective services. And these are the kindergarten cops that come and steal your children. The problem I mostly have with CPS isn't necessarily that I deny that there are children who are in abusive situations. I'm certainly probably more aware of those situations than most people. I worked a few years in education, and so I saw situations where this was the case. And of course, what do you do when you have a child who is in an extremely abusive situation? At the same time, I've also worked in like the mental health system and have been aware of a few cases where parents were really denied their parental rights for unfair reasons. And it seemed from that side, working with child protective services, that their decisions were often arbitrary. And in some cases, this is backed by this study, because it finds that half of Black and Native American children in California that were born in 1999 had an encounter with Child Protective Services sometime in their life. And then I think a total of 1 in 8 of those children at some time, 1 in 8 black children at some point were placed in foster care, and then 3% of black children experienced termination of their parental rights. This is all disproportionate to their white counterparts, although I don't want to make that to sound like there should be more intervention when it comes to white children. There should probably be less for every demographic group, including the white children, even if they're, the least likely to have these kind of encounters. So yeah, that showing that racial bias in the system does show that, it is somewhat arbitrary, and that the decisions aren't made just on the grounds of what's best for the children. Another interesting thing going on in the Biden administration is that the FDA is moving to ban flavored cigarettes and cigars, and then that includes menthol cigarettes. Now, this is something that's been kicked around for a while, but it looks like, I think this is the first time the FDA has taken this step. Now, it's important to remember that when you're talking about the FDA and they make one of these decisions, they have what they legal public commenting period, and so there's a chunk of time where you the FDA actually doesn't enact this and people could comment. And I believe when it came to kratom, they actually during this public commenting period got the FDA to reverse a decision that would have scheduled kratom. So there is room to reverse this ban. Of course, a lot of people are pointing out here that this is going to disproportionately affect the black community that disproportionately smoke menthol cigarettes, and this is going to create a situation possibly where the police would maybe be more in conflict, more in contact with the black community to enforce bans on menthol cigarettes, which I'm guessing, people like their cigarettes. And I know plenty of people who have smoked Cuban cigars in their life, and so people will smoke illegal things. Plenty of people who have smoked pot when it was illegal where they were. And so we shouldn't at all be surprised if this does lead to more conflict with police. And, it's important to remember that Eric Gardner in New York City, I believe he was in the actual city. I'm not, from New York, so all New York's in New York City. But anyways, I believe he was in New York City when he was strangled to death by police for selling loose cigarettes. And so it's not like police won't kill over cigarette laws. All right, in Michigan, we had this crazy story where Michigan has a fund to pay people who are wrongfully convicted. And through an act passed in 2016, they have a wrongful imprisonment compensation act. And right now, the fund has $9 million in pending claims and only a balance of $1.2 million, a massive shortfall. And so it just goes to show how terrible the cops and the prosecutors are at their job, actually putting the right people in prison for their crimes. I mean, here you kind of think about the victim being the person who has spent years of their life in jail wrongfully convicted. But on top of that, you got to think that meant the actual perpetrator of the crime went free and possibly committed it again. And so if it was an actual violent crime situation, maybe people raped 2, 3, 4, how many more women because they kept locking up the wrong person in jail, or, again, just happening most times. And I think a lot of the stats, especially like on violent sexual crime, is that it's committed by a small number of people. But they're repeat offenders. And so, you have a situation here where they're locking people in jail for huge amounts of the time, and they're completely innocent. And so, and again, these are only people who have, gotten their convictions like admitted to be wrongful convictions. There are so many cases where people are wrongfully convicted, and then they will end up making a plea deal, which basically says that I maintain my innocence, but I plead guilty because I admit that the state could, in a court of law, prove my guilt or get a guilty conviction against me. and they will then let that person out of prison, but at the same time they're not then able to either sue the state or qualify for like you have in Michigan a fund like this. Also, it seems a little unfair that they just arbitrarily set a year of your life's value at $50,000. My life is worth a hell of a lot more than that, and if I'm falsely imprisoned, I'm looking for a multi-million-dollar thing for every month I was in jail for all of the life they stole from me. And so that seems like a low number. But then $9 million in claims represents 180 years of life. And this isn't, you were sentenced to 40 years and you did 20. And then, this is, you were wrongfully in jail for 20 years of your life. And then since from 2017 to 2021, that fund paid out $22 million, which is equivalent to 440 years of human life wrongfully spent behind bars and imprisoned. And again, I think this only captures a small amount of the people who are wrongfully imprisoned, or even a small amount of the people who get out of jail after being wrongfully imprisoned. So this number should be a lot higher, but it's absolutely disgusting. And we really need to start looking at our prosecutors and our police officers and everybody involved in this process that's so damn bad at putting guilty people behind bars. In more bad news, we have Dave DeCamp here writing at antiwar.com. Veteran interventionist Samantha Power confirmed to head USAID. People who are long listeners to this show or my old show, Foreign Policy Focus, know I have a special hatred in my heart for Samantha Power, who was doing what she described as no good do good or rinky-dink work in Iraq, trying to work on reconciling the issues between the Sunni and the Shia and the Kurds in that country, and decided that what she really wanted to do was get Obama to intervene along with France and NATO powers in an air war against Gaddafi in Libya that ended up returning slavery to that country, creating a failed state, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of deaths. And this is one of the things that I think is so key to this and important to remember, is that Obama went on to say he was 51-49 on this decision. And so you had to think, if you're Samantha Power, maybe you were that 1%, and had you been no on this, which would have made you right, you would, Obama wouldn't have done this war, and that there would be hundreds of thousands of Africans still alive that are now dead. And this is the lady they just confirmed to head USAID. She went on, got promoted after the debacle in Libya that she helped facilitate, to the ambassador to the UN post, where she advocated for a war in Syria and in Yemen, which today is a train wreck and is the worst humanitarian situation on the planet. I want to talk a little bit about the F-35. Again, this is another absolute train wreck. And there's a very good article in Responsible Statecraft by Andrew Luntz titled, "Would You Pay $1.7 trillion for a plane that couldn't fly?" And he's breaking down the new GAO report. He highlights in here the Odin system, which Will Porter talked about extensively on the show on Monday. So either go back to Monday's show or find Will's article on this, where you could read about the Odin system and why the logistics system for the F-35 is continuing to not work. But I think the two key points from this article that I wanted to bring up are, he's estimating the 1.7 trillion number on, it's going to take $1.2 trillion between now and the end of the F-35's life cycle to maintain the planes, and then we've already coughed up, will cough up another $500 billion to actually pay for the planes. And so this comes out to about $25.7 billion a year, which he points out is bigger than the budget for the entire state of, let's say, Maryland or Connecticut. And I'm sure, most Americans probably live in states with, maybe not most, but a lot of Americans and maybe a lot of listeners of the show live in states with smaller budgets than the F-35. And so, when you talk about what could possibly be done if we, get rid of these programs, and sometimes, people think, they're talking about welfare, and you say, well, if you cut the military budget, then you could pay for this. And they say, yeah, that's what whataboutism or whatever. But we are talking about again, the budget bigger than the state of Connecticut that we could free up just by eliminating the F-35 project here. So one of the other things that he points out in this article that's really important is it has a major supply chain issue with the engines, and the GAO report is estimating that it's going to be 800 engines short by 2030, and that's going to ground 43% of the F-35 fleet won't be able to fly just because of a lack of engines. Now, I have two questions, and I'm very interested about the first one, which is, will the Israeli F-35s experience the same engine problems at the same engine shortages? Because it sounds like they're just not going to be able to crank out enough new ones by 2030, in 2030, as the U.S. has. I'm guessing that they're maybe going to get priority on those F-35 engines over even the U.S. So it's always interesting how that works. But then 43% of the fleet is going to be grounded, and all the problems that this is going to create, because the pilots have to have massive hours of training to be able to operate these very complex, they're very high tech, but there's a lot to operating these machines. If you read the Project for Government Oversight POGO report on the crash of I think it was a F-18 Super Hornet that hit a refueling tanker in the Pacific, and you read how difficult these planes are to operate and why the pilots need so many training hours to be able to continue to operate these very complex machines, and they fly them so close together and everything, that this is going to be an absolute disaster. And I don't know how anybody from reading the report doesn't just today say, you know what, we're done with it. It's just absolutely clearly not worth it to try and maintain this plane. There's going to be too many shortages. We'll sell what these planes we can. We'll try to scrape back what little money of our back possible, but we're going to either take that money and Biden's proposing another $1.8 trillion in spending to pay for this family plan or something like that. At least cut into the debt a little bit, give some tax breaks, pay for something. Anything's better than giving more money to Lockheed Martin. All right. Next up, we're talking about the Black Sea, which seems pretty far from the U.S. to me, but apparently not to the U.S. military, because for the first time since 2008, writes Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, a U.S. Coast Guard cutter entered the Black Sea. It's the USCGS Hamilton, and it's sailing around this body of water that, of course, borders Russia, Turkey, Georgia, Bulgaria, Romania. And it's just crazy that we have our Coast Guard all the way over here. As I usually quote Scott Horton. The U.S. military is under the impression that this body of water, this time the Black Sea, is an American lake, and we should just treat it like the Lake of Michigan and float our Coast Guard around there as we please. This is absolutely absurd, and one of these stories that should be absolutely creating demand from the American to bring our troops home. China is reporting that there increased unhappiness with the U.S. under the Biden administration. According to China, the U.S. has increased their operations in territories claimed by China. They say activity by U.S. military ships was up 20% and planes by 40%. I'm not, going to take the Chinese government's word for this. I'm sure they have reason to inflate that number. However, everybody knows I'm very, astute with the news when it comes to this. I pay attention. Every time we sail a ship through the South China Sea, deploy an aircraft carrier group there, I'm on it. I'm covering it on this show, and it does seem to me that we're doing more that during the Biden administration, and they've carried out, if not more frequent, certainly more provocative, closer to the Chinese coastline flights during the Biden administration. So it seems that the Chinese government, if not right in number, is right in spirit by saying that these operations are increasing under the Biden administration. One particularly provocative action is being carried out by the U.S. right now. We have a warship shadowing a Chinese aircraft carrier strike group, and this is in the Philippine Sea, so in a body of water, I guess a little bit maybe east of the South China Sea. And you can see a map of the kind of location here if you're watching the show. I guess that would be east of Taiwan. Now, I believe China has made some complaints about this maneuver and said that, their issue with it is it's interfering with the drills that the Chinese vessels are trying to carry out. And if it's interfering with those drills, then accidents do happen. A lot of the technology now is, very heavily um, weapon system guided, and so those kind of systems could make mistakes, right? It's possible that they're carrying out some kind of live fire test, and the missile lots onto the wrong kind of target, and it even if it ends up too close to an American ship, that could create a real problem. Of course, in the past we've had ships in the South China Sea and in this region of the world coming very close, U.S. and Russian, U.S. Chinese ships coming very close, and we don't need these close calls with countries we really don't have any issue with. It's none of our business what's happening in this body of water. We care what's happening on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. And it's just not clear to our country's leadership. I'm not going to do a breakdown of Biden's State of the Union address, other than it was kind of a bore. But one of the things that he really focused on was this competition with China. And he really seems on turning up the heat on it. Few stories on Afghanistan here that I think are important. This one from Reuters. It says that the U.S. envoy to Afghanistan is pressing for women involvement in peace talks. I believe they're also pressing for more minority involvement in peace talks. Now, in a sense, I don't think it's a terrible thing that more women would be involved in the peace talks, between the U.S. Or between the Taliban and the Afghan government. At the same time, if it's a poison pill or something that's going to make talks more difficult, and we are approaching a time when the U.S. will be less involved in Afghanistan, so it's more important for a peace deal to, be exist between the Taliban government and the Afghan government. This seems like unnecessary interference and kind of pouring gasoline on the flames when just let the Afghan government do whatever they have to do to make a deal with the Taliban that creates some kind of peace in that country, the least amount of violence possible. The Taliban themselves have recently proposed direct talks between them and the Afghan government and not include extra third parties. Maybe this is a good idea. Not that I think it would necessarily, be the silver bullet to the problems and could honestly fall apart very quickly. But at the same time, everybody who's involved, actually lives in Afghanistan, gets involved in the room. Maybe they could work out or figure out some things that they agree on or don't want to have conflict over. And so it could be positive, although the initial reaction from the Afghan government, and this is from the negotiation team of Abdullah, is that they're not interested. Now, important thing to remember is Abdullah probably isn't the guy that represents what Afghans want best. And so if there's either pressure from the Afghan people or other factions of the Afghan government that's more interested in talks, I wouldn't necessarily roll out this proposal right away. I think throughout the Afghan peace talks, one of the things I've noticed is that pretty much every side initially reacts to every proposal with no way. And then they say, well, maybe. Not every time they say, well, maybe. But sometimes they do say, well, maybe there is some room for talks or something. So this could potentially play out, even though the initial indication isn't that it's going to happen. We have some more information. The story is becoming a little bit more clear on what the U.S.'s future role will be in Afghanistan. We have from, I believe, Zalmay Khalilzad, Reuters reports here, that Washington plans on helping the Afghan government find replacements for departing U.S. contractors, and so this seems to be a case more and more clear where we're just replacing and privatizing this war, not necessarily stop waging it. If the U.S. is paying for these contractors, then these contractors are going to do what the U.S. wants, and specifically, the U.S. is looking to provide financial support to maintain the contractual needs of the Afghan security forces when it comes to their planes. Again, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. They're looking at the maintenance on the Afghan government's air force. Interesting news. The State Department has ordered some of its employees out of the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. They say if you could do your business elsewhere, then do it. I'm not sure how many people this actually represents. It could be this has been the status in Afghanistan for a long time. I don't think it's necessarily a part of the drawdown, but out of concern that since Biden is going to, here in 2 days, blow past Trump's deal with the Taliban, the withdrawal date there, the attacks on U.S. Assets in Afghanistan as a whole, not just the military, but also our diplomats potentially could be an increased risk from the Taliban, and so I think that's why they're moving those people out of Afghanistan. The U.S. is also playing, this one, the overwhelming majority of Americans back the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. This from The Hill. It was a Hill-Harris poll, and it found 73% of Americans support the withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is absolutely great news. Even though politicians love war and they love their military industrial complex donors and appeasing them, if 73% of people support anything, you'll find most politicians on the right side of that issue, although not all of them. I'm sure Liz Cheney, and hell, even Liz Warren isn't even really great on this issue, even though such an overwhelming percentage of Americans are, even though so much of our news comes from the mainstream media. Couple stories on Iran, the most important being the U.S. Navy fired warning shots at two, I believe, Iranian Guard naval ships so the U.S. was carrying out patrol in the Persian Gulf. They say they're in international waters. Even if they're in international waters, a warship off the coast of Iran can make them uncomfortable. So they send their IRGC into international waters as well. They say the USS Firebolt was a ship. It was a Cyclone class patrol ship, and it said it fired warning shots after the vessels came within 68 yards of the ship. That's a little over 150 feet, 150, 200 feet away from the ship. So that's, relatively close. At the same time, this is a U.S. ship that's relatively close to Iran, which is why Iran cares. If the U.S. ships were out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, I don't think the IRGC would be interfering with them. And, that's the problem here. I did a live stream, I believe, on Tuesday as the story was breaking, and it's an exclusive with Odysee. And I did that live stream with my buddy Patrick McFarlane, host of the Liberty Weekly podcast. I suggest you all go check that out if you haven't already. But this was developing, and one of the things we are talking about is, man, how dangerous are these situations? The U.S. goes to fire a warning shot, and however, they're trying to fire the warning shot, this shell, explodes or something like that, rather than sends the message, and somebody on the American side misstates that explosion for an Iranian, firing on the U.S., and then they actually fire at the Iranian ship. Something like this could escalate very quickly. These are very dangerous maneuvers that often get dismissed, or it's, the Iranians are so provocative. Look where these American ships are: the Persian Gulf, the Black Sea, the Pacific Ocean. These are international bodies of water, some of them located on the exact opposite side of the world, and not meant for the U.S. to control the whole thing. So Other news on Iran, we had the Iranians calling for a prisoner swap with the Americans. I've heard that, this a few times the Iranians say this over the past couple of years. I'm not sure what the Iranians are proposing, if it's something that's really like, we send you three, you send us three, or the Iranians are asking for a lot more. Honestly, from the perspective of the Biden administration, unless, one of these people committed a violent crime in the U.S., I think it's a good idea to move ahead with this to show that we're serious about diplomacy, but I don't anticipate that happening. A couple stories involving more Israel. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Jake the Snake Sullivan, U.S. and Israel have a policy of, quote, no surprises. And so this is suggesting that the U.S. has at least been aware of the recent Israeli efforts to wage asymmetrical warfare against Iran, whether that's by attacking the Natanz facility where Iran conducts some nuclear, part of their nuclear energy program, their civilian nuclear program, where they conduct some of that. They carried out a cyber attack, and then they've also recently attacked a couple of Iranian ships, one in the Red Sea, one off the coast of Syria. And so the U.S. is engaging in talks with Iran. The comments, particularly coming from Jake Sullivan, seem to be saying that we're committed to our relationship with Israel, and I imagine this is concerning to the Iranians that the U.S. is looking at what Israel is doing and saying that we're aware of it and we're on the same ground as it, because they're also engaging in what are supposed to be essentially peace talks with Iran. And some other concerning news from the Biden administration, they're deploying a team of senior officials to the Middle East, and it's led by the dastardly Brett McGurk. You may remember that name. He is, I believe, the envoy to Syria who resigned at the end of 2018 when Trump announced we were leaving that country. As expected, the U.S. will continue to service Saudi planes that are bombing Yemen. We now know that in comments made to VODs by the Pentagon, that they're still maintaining the Saudi warplanes, and this is a key thing that the U.S. That Saudi Arabia needs to continue their war against Yemen. And I suspected that this would happen. My guess is that if they're called on this and that people make a big deal out of it, they're going to say that, oh, we're only, making sure the planes could fly so that they could take out Houthi targets that would wage offensive war against Saudi Arabia. Of course, this, just allows for the bombing campaign to go on. And if Biden was an honest man, he would have ended this when he took office like he promised, instead of concealing it for nearly 100 days now. Last story I have is an update from something I mentioned on the last show, which was I was concerned about a possible breakout of violence in Somalia, as the parliament have voted to extend the term of the president, Mohammed al-Abduli Mohammed, by 2 years, and there was a lot of protesting about this because they were supposed to have elections. Now the president came out and said he will not accept that extension of term, but also didn't resign the post, and so until elections happen, I guess he's going to continue to be the president. I don't know if this is enough to actually quell the violence in Somalia. I did see that al-Shabaab had carried out an attack in the capital city of Mogadishu. I'm not sure if that has anything really to do with the president's. Al-Shabaab carries out suicide bombings in Mogadishu, not every week, but not infrequently either. So it wouldn't be a huge surprise that this was just an attack that al-Shabaab was carrying out. But it does seem like there was some recent protesting in Somalia and some more tensions in that country. And until this situation is really resolved and elections are held, or it's clear what this president's intentions are, I'm going to try to keep an eye on and see how this develops. And, hope that more violence doesn't break out in Somalia, especially as, Trump withdrew troops at the end of his term from Somalia, although all they did is deploy them to, other countries in the region. And we even had AFRICOM joking that they're just commuting to work now. And so while that isn't a giant factor, the Huts are certainly going to say, oh, look, here's another example. You leave and everything goes to hell, so you have to stay everywhere forever. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping it up for the week. I'll be back next week. I got some interviews already scheduled. Very excited talking about Danny Sturgeon about Chad, which is a country that I interviewed. Me and Will Porter interviewed him about a couple of weeks before the longtime dictator there, Debbie, was killed in fighting, and we had talked about how critical Chad's role was in like the Franco-American Empire of North Africa, and now that he's dead, what's going to happen in North Africa, the Sahel region? And so Danny's going to break all that down the show. I'm really excited to talk to him about it because honestly, I think our show was maybe some of the only content in 2021 anywhere in the foreign policy community talking about Chad. This goes for even like foreign affairs. Those people don't, do a whole lot of coverage of it. And we are talking about their role. And I even, talked to Danny about the potential of him being overthrown by rebels and what the risks were, and, what it means that France didn't come to his aid. And so I have so many questions, very excited. So be sure to subscribe to the show somewhere so you don't miss that episode. Support the show, Patreon, Subscribe Star. Crypto addresses are in the show notes page. Thanks everybody so much. Be back with shows next week.